This talk is all about the Finzean Bucket Mill in Aberdeenshire. I'm going to run through some of the topics relating to legal structure, planning, permission listed building consent, and health and safety. Just one moment, I need to turn on. Is that still showing the presentation, or have you now seen my presenter view?
That's absolutely fine from our point of view. We just see the presentation.
That's great. That looks really slick then, doesn't it? So, question, where is Finzean? Specifically Finzean, not Finzean. We're over in Aberdeenshire on the Water of Fuch, which is a tributary of the River Dee. So the Dee and the Don run over from the Cairngorms to Aberdeen. We're just outside the Cairngorms National Park boundary, which is a blessing and a curse. And there are 4 mills on the Water of Fuch, the Bucket Mill, and about a mile downstream, sawmill and a turning mill. They're a kind of complex that exists as one site. And then another mile and a half downstream is the Mill of Glinter, which is a grade B listed meal mill, but I'm not really going to go into that today. So this story begins, for me at least, back in 2022. I was on the SPAB fellowship and came along to the SPAB Scotland Working Party that was held at the mill there with David McFerrin, who was on the fellowship as well. And the man in the middle of the picture there, that's the sadly late David Duncan. He was the last miller at the sawmill and the turning mill. And came back in 2023 for another working party where I was brought in as a tutor. And then nothing really happened. And it left a question, what to do about the mills. And then a couple of years rumbled by, roll of the dice, changed, found myself living in Aberdeenshire again. And what to do? Nothing had moved with the mills. That momentum of the working parties hadn't really gone anywhere. And you could see, and you really can see when you visit the site now, if you'd ever come on those working parties, degradation really starting to take hold. So another roll of the dice in 2024, I had some support from the Churchill Fellowship to research rural craft businesses across Europe. So I've had a pet project of being very into shingle making. I actually used to live in Austria, trained as a shingle maker there. And I've been trying to bring that craft to Scotland. And it turns out in Finzean, at the Finzean Mills, there is a precedent of shingle making. So I use this as the lens through which to understand all of these different conditions relating to rural craft businesses, how they're supported, how they can, all the good stuff basically. And it led then to a lot of questions about how best to take forward something at the Bucket Mill, specifically the Bucket Mill, because the site is wholly owned by the trust. I'll come into that in a minute. So one avenue, limited company. The other avenue would be a private lease where I take all of the cost. Should this be a project for the owner, the Burst Community Trust? Should it be a new charity or a Scottish Charitable Incorporated organisation? And more crucially, how do we safeguard legacy in that structure? Because there is a clear problem from past, all sorts of past things, how things have been managed, just the complications, personal, private situations, etc., of the skills of those millers have not been passed on. But then you ask the question, how have these mills survived? Well, one key ingredient is agency. Those millers have been left to get on with the job. And the other thing is that they've generally had security of tenure. So all of those factors going into the pot. The answer is what to do about the mills? Well, community interest company. So a community interest company is sometimes called a social enterprise. It has to have defined community benefit. It can't pay dividends, so that's not a problem for us in the heritage game. This is not a money-making exercise. If we make money, it's going to go back into repairing the mill. And specifically, it has to be asset locked to a charity. In this case, we're asset locked to the Burst Community Trust. They own the mill anyway. So it means that if for any reason we fail, which who knows, maybe it does, it means any progress we make, any plant, equipment, machines, tools, all of those assets, they return to that parent charity. It's very good for legacy. It means that someone else can pick up the pieces and that progress isn't necessarily lost. We have just signed a 25-year lease on the site from Burst Community Trust. So there's that ingredient of security of tenure. And we work closely with the Burst Community Trust. This is a mutually beneficial relationship. What we hope to do in the CIC is bring the skills and the expertise that they are lacking. We take away their liability to maintain those buildings, which means that they, as a charity, with their own objectives, which are much wider than just historic and heritage buildings, are able to take on a lot more and deal with what they have better. So I mentioned that question, why the bucket mill? The idea is that why not all of the Fingean Mills? Why are we not the Fingean Mills CIC? If what we're trying to do here is make a model real craft business. So this is about getting the right ingredients that can be repeated. So the goal is we want the bucket mill to be somewhere where we're making wooden buckets, and we've got some other elements of the business, such as running a sawmill. That's all to keep the wheels ticking over and bringing the money in so that we can repair the building without grant funding. But hopefully, through setting up things like volunteering structures, people will come out the ether, much like I did when I came on the working party in 2022. We need to be mindful when somebody's coming up and, there's an apprentice, say, we want to try and get a model which could potentially birth in the future something like the Fingean Sawmill CIC or the Fingean Turning Mill CIC, and support somebody else to take forward those elements, because really each mill is its own stand-alone business. So if we look at the Fingean Mills on the whole, they're all designated A-listed buildings. Bats roost in the mills, and the River Fuch comes under the River Dee Special Area of Conservation, specifically managing salmon and freshwater pearl mussels. If we take a little look in on that map, these are the mills that are all owned by the Burst Community Trust. There are two weirs on the River Fuch. They're about 250 metres above the bucket mill and 250 metres above the turning mill and the sawmill complex. And I'm going to first take you to the sawmill weir. So they're very simple. All of these mills really show the relationship to landscape. So the weirs across the river are made of logs and river stones. This weir, or both weirs, were washed out by Storm Frank in 2016. This is really the pivotal change where mills go in Fingean from being used regularly to there being this disruption and ultimately slow and steady decline. And when the works were carried out in 2018 to reinstate this weir, there was a stipulation put on by the River Board to install a fish pass. So this had to be designed. That involved pulling in this company called EnviroCenter, who have prepared this design back in 2018 at great expense, I would add. And this is the result. This is this sort of landscaped area in the mill. Everybody wins here. There's a sensible solution which is in keeping with the vernacular tradition of this weir. Effectively, this is a notch cut in that log. I don't know if you can see my cursor on the screen, but there's a notch in that uppermost log of the weir, which allows a higher area of flow for salmon to come through the weir. Salmon like fast flowing water, they're attracted to it, which is unfortunately why they're attracted to the mill outflow lades when the wheel is turning. There's anecdotes of salmon thrashing around in their hundreds when the water's been shut off the outflow of the lades. So that's the sawmill weir. I'm now going to take you up to the bucket mill weir, and this is quite self-evident of the task at hand here. So the bucket mill weir unfortunately washed out twice now in the last decade. It was repaired also in 2018, but it's a little bit unsure in the records when exactly it washed out, but I think it was 2021. And to reinstate this, the Fisheries Board didn't specify originally that we needed to install a fish pass, but they now wish to have a fish pass in the river here. So that puts us onto the road to repair. First, to install such a fish pass, we need planning permission, specifically listed building consent. This is requiring technical drawings for the before and after condition, a design of the fish pass, which again, we've employed this specialist company, EnviroCenter, to make us some plans. That should hopefully be ready very, very soon. Heritage impact assessment, design statement, ecological surveys. We're not just reinstating the mill weir. You've got multiple issues to address across the site. So here is the upper sluice gate. You can see the weir and kind of get a bit of a picture of where that washout has happened behind the weir. And a quick health and safety analysis of this throws up several problems. There's no handrail. Those two boards pose a slip hazard. There's a trip hazard that somebody in their infinite wisdom put a brace right across the footboard. And circled in yellow, you can see the square boss. Well, there's a lever that lives in the mill that's attached to that and that ratchets up and down the sluice gate to be able to make it work. And so drawings before and after, we're very, very lucky to have Sian Loftus come onto our team, and she's got many years of experience, and tasked her to producing these drawings for our listed building consent application, which is a godsend. And then what I've been working on in the background is the heritage impact assessment. So this is how we state, what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. That's just, time spent driving a laptop rather than actually repairing the thing, but by the by. So when we talk about planning permission, we then need to get a license from SPAB. So SPAB have been interesting to deal with, to say the least. On a national level, very frustrating. On a local level, when we finally got through the machinery to get a local contact, pretty good, I'd say. They obviously require us to have our fish pass design, but they've wanted to impose abstraction calculations. So the amount of water taken out and put back into the River Fuke has never been quantified in all of the years, 200 plus years of the Finzean Mills being in existence. But that's the modern way. We want to know, so we need to come up with some abstraction calculations. They were going to ask for an annual abstraction fee of £500. Thankfully, sense has prevailed and that's been waived. Similarly, they wanted to have us pay the SPAB license fee, which is nearly £3,000. And because we're installing a fish pass, our work is deemed an environmental service. So that fee is also waived. Thank goodness. And the next sort of organisation in the equation is the River Board, and they are really needing to approve our fish pass design. But we're going to liaise with them early on. They really put us on to EnviroCentre, the design company. So that's a very positive working relationship there. But the reality of all of this, £10,000, 18 months work just to get to the point of actually, putting a shovel in the ground and getting going. And there's a philosophical question there. Is this too much bureaucracy, or is this how we really protect historic buildings? In the meantime, all of these A-listed mills continue to degenerate. So winding back to around 2018 and again in 2022, Health and Safety Executive have visited the Finzean Mills before my involvement. And it doesn't take anybody to realise, walking around the site, there are a multitude of risks, not least in this line in red here. If either mill was to be operated in this condition, this would involve contraventions of health and safety law due to the risk of serious injury from entanglement or cutting, severing from contact with these dangerous parts. If you see the circular saw blades in the sawmill and at the bucket mill, it's pretty obvious. These are capable of taking life and limb, and many a miller in the past, and the late David Duncan, didn't have all of his fingers. When we look at the bucket mill, you can see, and we're going to talk now about health and safety compliance, you can just see when you go for a look around these places, all of the challenges for health and safety. So as a new community interest company, we really land at ground zero in terms of inheritance of health and safety protocol structure. We have a risk assessment from the Burst Community Trust to undertake public tours of the mill, but really there is a huge amount lacking. So we're starting from scratch. In the first phase, which we're being supported by the Architectural Heritage Fund in this, we are able to bring in a health and safety consultant. Thankfully, in Aberdeen, we're well served by the oil industry, so there's many sort of independent health and safety advisory companies. A tender went out for that. We've got somebody in. And the hope here is that somebody that is not perhaps heritage specific would just be able to go around and look at the site and go, right, okay, here are a number of risks that you need to now mitigate before really getting into the machinery. But what we're trying to do in the longer run is build internal competence. So as the CIC begins to grow, and we hopefully are going to be able to have employees, staff, volunteers, people to manage that, we need to develop our own internal competence. We need to have the necessary framework in place to risk assess and mitigate risk as required. So that pathway involves mapping each machine, undertaking listed building consent applications for the interventions that are required on each machine, such as installing mesh guards around open belts. And everything needs risk assessed. And in there as well is a whole competence management system, so that there is a beginning, middle, and end in terms of training. So perhaps you start on an electric lathe, you can learn the principles of lathe work before you're let loose under supervision on historic and antiquated lathes, and then eventually at some point deemed competent and able to operate the machinery on your own. So just for an idea of how dangerous this machinery can be, it doesn't take much to see William Brown, the last miller before Stan's time. William Brown passed away in 1974. He was the last of the Browns who ran the bucket mill since it was built in 1853. But he's got his hands right inside there, inside of a turning bucket, turning the inside of a bucket. And this is one of the lathes. This lathe in particular is the smaller of the bucket bottom lathes. It's used to turn the bucket bottoms. And another appraisal of the risks present. There's no dust extraction. The bearings on this particular machine are reported to run quite hot, need frequent lubrication. You've clearly got an open belt there. Stan, the retired miller, tells me an anecdote of once trying to move that drive belt from the drive pulley over to the idle pulley, just like David Duncan does, he said, in the turning mill, and he managed to have his fingers sort of get pulled through and around that pulley, and it's a little miracle, he said, that his fingers never came off. He didn't do it again. But generally in the bucket mill, we've got very poor lighting. There is no means for a safety stop to turn the machinery off. There's no training plan, obviously, that we've inherited, nothing like that. And there's currently no asbestos survey, although that's all in hand. And in terms of mitigations, we need to be looking at things like dust extraction or PPE. We need training plans, operating procedures, and safety management system. And then for listed building consent, we want to be installing things on this particular machine like belt guards, changeover forks, improving the lubrication so you don't have to put your fingers in there and it would reduce the risk of fire. And the whole mill needs rewired. Now, I've got a few friends in the heritage railway industry and they're quite helpful to speak to. And when you come to sort of try and start thinking about how do I go about solving these problems, there's things like the National Traction Engine Trust exists, and they put out a risk assessment for operating historic saw benches at steam fairs and the like. So there's some useful bits and pieces out there that sort of guide and provide a precedent. And I always think if heritage railways exist, if all this steamy world stuff can exist, that picture I took 10 years ago up in my native Norfolk, if that's compliant, then of course working mills can be. So to go from that world of ye olde stuff into the future, I'll share with you now, this is where we're starting to apply modern technology to the project here. So this is a 3D laser scan. We've had Daria and Douglas from the Robert Gordon University come and bring their very snazzy laser scanning equipment. And this is real game changer for us. So we're able to look at, say, that lathe I was just talking about, which is circled red there. We need to make drawings for the before and after condition, and laser surveying means that when nothing is square, plumb, or straight in this mill, we can get an accurate drawing from that digital information and be able to pull together those drawings much more cost effectively and accurately. And compare that to these drawings from 1974. We are blessed that the late Bruce Walker visited the bucket mill in 1974 and produced a beautiful set of hand-drawn pen and slide rule style drawings, full survey of the mill, all floors. And we've brought in architects. They are our lead architect on this project, and slowly but surely these historic drawings are being updated to reflect the various changes at the mill. And that all goes into the computer of surveying and records, that we can start to map a picture of the bucket mill and hopefully the other mills in time. There's this record from 1974. 50 years later, we've now produced via the laser scan a capture of a moment in time. And that means for the millers of 2050, 2075, that starts to record that picture. And we're just getting to the end here, so hold your horses. This shows you the process really that I've got to go through moving forward. So this sort of hieroglyphic chart that is imposed on one of the plans from 1974. Every machine, every line shaft, every drive belt is coded by operating floor and by machine type. And that means that we can then start to catalog and inventory both what is there, and then in terms of health and safety and risk assessing risks. For instance, I'll just go back, GS1, if you can find it on the chart there, it's in the saw bench. GS1 is the main saw. So it's a case of understanding what hazard types might exist at this mill and how we might mitigate them. And this is where, when we've built internal competence, the hope is in the future that we can do this stuff and then pass this off to be audited externally. And then hopefully we have there a pathway which has not yet been found to be able to actually operate this machinery. In summary, loads to do, loads of money, lots of time, but hopefully lots of hope. And it is worth to say a huge thank you to everybody who's funded this project so far. And if you'd like some more information, there's all of our web links. I put a bit in the chat just before this started, so you've got some links and bits and bobs there. And I think that is 20 minutes.